Welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to create the rustic background. I like this background because it's easy to do. Plus, it really helps keep the focus on the contents inside the ovals. Let's get started. Use a shader of your choice and burn fairly wide bands of color down the board. I am using the flat of the shader, so I have as much of the metal in contact with the wood as possible. Obviously, the bands do not need to be perfectly straight. Also, the bands do not need to be uniform in color or even the same color. This is supposed to look rustic, so variation is a good thing. If you watch, you will see that I burn a line pulling the pen tip downward. When I get to the end of the area, I start a new band of color. But I start this band at the bottom of the area and pull it towards the top. This adds a little more variation. It is perfectly okay, in fact it's desirable, to leave some gaps between the bands of color. You can actually use those gaps to control the darkness level. Lots of gaps will make the area appear paler in color, whereas having just a few gaps will make it appear much darker. Now burn thin lines of color down the board. Angle the pen tip so that only the end or the front edge of it is in contact with the wood. Vary how long the lines are, vary where you start the lines, and vary the width and the color of the lines. I like to work sections at a time, but you can fill the entire background with the wide bands of color before burning the thin lines. It might be easier or feel more comfortable to use a writer pen tip to burn the thin lines. You will have to test that out and see what you think. As you work your way across the board, it is important to make sure that the overall color or darkness level is similar. So make sure to leave similar gaps and burn stroke variations. With more of the board being burned in, it is easier to see the overall tan color the background has. To me, it is starting to look a little too uniform or plain. One way to quickly change that is by adding a few really dark lines here and there. I think of the really dark lines as representing cracks in the board. I find it easier to rotate the board and then fill in the background on the lower half. You may or may not agree. Again, it is something to try out and determine what works best for you. Just make sure that the lower half of the board is similar in color to the upper half. This board is considerably longer than the last one, so I'm working in vertical sections down the board. The process is still basically the same, but there is one important alteration. Make sure to vary where the wide bands of color start and end at. This will help ensure that the board doesn't have noticeable patches or sections on it. Keep in mind that this rustic background can be burned in vertically or horizontally. I have a horizontal example in the upper left corner. If you go with a horizontal orientation, I do recommend rotating the board so you can still burn the lines vertically or up and down. The reason is that it's just a lot easier to burn in this direction versus left to right. The last thing I want to show you is how to blend the thick dark bands, or the cracks as I think of them. Notice the starting point of this band. That doesn't look like a crack. To fix that, place the pen tip just above where you started the line. Then pull the pen tip downward. Allow the burn mark to taper off. You do this by gradually lifting the pen tip up and away from the wood as you finish the burn stroke. Well, that is it for this video. I hope the information was helpful. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week.